Today's lesson is a hunger artist. Hi, everybody. I'm Roger.
Hello, I'm Kiki.
And today we're going to continue to summarize our featured story for this month, A Hunger Artist. It's a short story that was published way back in 1922, over 100 years ago. And it was written by Franz Kafka. Maybe you've heard of him, a famous writer. And this is all about a guy who was fasting and could go without food for a long time. And it was some sort of performance that people would come to see. They would come to see the man who was starving himself.
And we learned that this particular hunger artist actually thinks that he can starve himself for more than 40 days, but because his manager told him you're not allowed to starve for more than 40 days, he becomes very gloomy and very frustrated because he thinks he can really prove that he is a magnificent hunger artist and he can starve for much longer.
And that's where we left off last time, and let's continue to find out what happens in our story next. Let's listen to the first part for today, and then we'll come back to talk about it.
As tastes changed, people lost interest in the hunger artist's performances. His manager tried his best, taking the artist across half of Europe in search of proper audiences, but it was as if everyone had made a secret agreement to stop seeing his shows.
Okay, so remember, this person is performing in various shows as a hunger artist. It's probably a traveling show with other attractions as well, maybe acrobats or freak shows or things like that. And, of course, people go to those places to check things out, but tastes changed. Your taste, of course, is what you like. And sometimes people's tastes change, as they do in society. And, of course, restaurants come and go with new kinds of food because tastes change all the time. Tastes don't refer just to your sense of taste. It also refers to what exactly you like in terms of fashion or performance or whatever. So here it says, as tastes changed, people lost interest in the hunger artist's performances. That does happen sometimes. It was probably fun for a while. It was a novelty. They thought it was interesting, but later they became bored with it and wanted to see something else.
And it's also possible that the way we think or the way we look at society, we change our ideas. So it's possible that that's why people started to lose interest in this type of performances. So the hunger artist, his manager, tried his best, taking the artist across half of Europe in search of proper audiences. But it was as if everyone had made a secret agreement to stop seeing his shows.
So they spread the word around by word of mouth, through gossip, through whatever. You get the idea. The word spread. That's what he thought happened, that the word spread. And they all kind of agreed, hey, don't go see this guy's shows. We just don't like it. But that's not really what happened. Basically, what happened is people just lost interest. People get bored pretty quickly.
And it's also possible that everyone just thought that it's not proper to see somebody suffering this way. So it wasn't literally a secret agreement. Not everybody got together. Half of Europe didn't come together and say, let's stop watching his performance. Maybe everyone just decided that this was just not right. So it seemed like the crowd or the audiences just stopped going to see his shows naturally.
Right. And I did want to mention again that audiences here refers to different groups in different places. You cannot refer to individual people in one audience as the audiences. The audience applauded at the end of the performance, I could say. And yes, it seemed to be that they all made a secret agreement in which they all decided not to go see his shows, but that's not what happened. Again, as I said, they probably just got really bored and wanted to see something else. Okay, that brings us to the end of the first part of our lesson for today. Let's listen now to the second part.
Too old and too dedicated to his art to start a new career, the artist parted ways with his manager and found work with a circus. Hardly the main attraction, he was placed in a modest cage near the animals. Occasionally, someone would recognize him or find his self-denial impressive, but far more frequently, people simply walked right by. Eventually, the hunger artist was forgotten about completely. Then one day, someone noticed the artist's cage, seemingly sitting empty. They removed the hay covering the floor to find him there, weak and nearly dead. With his last breath, he whispered an apology for wanting so badly to impress everyone. The truth, he confessed, was that he'd only fasted because he'd never found any food he liked eating.
大家好，首先看到第二部分，我们来介绍形容词 dedicated， 它的意思是一心一意的、投入的或是热忱的。例如 Claire is a dedicated musician who practices several hours every day. Claire 是个很投入的音乐家，每天都练好几个小时。又或者说 The actor was so dedicated to his role that he stayed in character even between takes. 这位演员十分投入他的角色，就连拍摄空档都在扮演角色。另外补充这个字的动词 dedicate, D-E-D-I-C-A-T-E, dedicate. 它的意思是将点点点奉献给，或是将时间或是心力投入，致力于。举例来说 Tim dedicated his book to his wife. Tim 将他写的书献给妻子。再举一个例子 Tony has dedicated all of his time to learning English. Tony 把所有时间都用来学英文。再来我们看到形容词 modest， 它的意思是普通的、适度的、节制的或是温和的。例如 Although Jake is quite wealthy, he lives in a modest home in a quiet neighborhood. 虽然 Jake 相当有钱，但他住在一个安静社区的普通房子里。又或者说 I like shopping at the store because they have great service and only a modest markup on the goods. 我喜欢在这家商店购物，因为他们有很棒的服务，而且商品价格也只有适度的涨幅。下一个我们看到副词 occasionally， 这个字的意思是偶尔或是有时。例如 Isabel occasionally meets up with her old classmates from college. Isabel 偶尔会和她大学的老同学见面。或是 I occasionally have cereal for breakfast. 我有时候会吃麦片当早餐。再来，我们看到名词 apology， 这个字的意思是道歉或是认错。例如 I owe you an apology for the horrible things I said to you earlier. 我之前对你说了很难听的话，所以我欠你一个道歉。或是I accept your apology, but please don't do that again. 我接受你的道歉，但请不要再那么做了。再来我们看到动词 confess， 这个字的意思是坦诚、公认或是忏悔。例如 The criminal confessed to his crimes in court. 那名罪犯在法庭上坦诚犯行。或是 I must confess that I had no idea what he was talking about. 我必须坦诚我不知道他在说什么。
Okay, continuing with our summary here, it says, too old and too dedicated to his art to start a new career, the artist parted ways with his manager and found work with a circus. So this does happen sometimes when you get too old and you're too dedicated to your career or to your art, and therefore you cannot start a new career. You just can't learn new tricks. You're an old dog and you can't learn new tricks. And so you just try to figure out a way to keep on making money with the skills that you do have. So he was very dedicated to his art. If you're dedicated to something, that means you are devoted to it. You don't want to give up. You're thinking about that thing only, and you're not going to accept any other ideas. You could be dedicated to the one you love, as it goes in that song by the Mamas and Papas, dedicated to the one I love. But in this particular case, he's dedicated to his art and just too old to start a new career.
And it's also possible that his dedication to his art meant that he couldn't change his performance method to fit what society or the new audience wants to see from him.
And also in the sentence, we have the verb phrase to part ways with someone. That means you kind of break up with them. You no longer have a business relationship with them. It could mean you're breaking up with your boyfriend or girlfriend as well. But in this particular case, as he parted ways with his manager, he said, "Thank you for your service, but I don't need you anymore. I'm going to work independently now." And then the artist found a job with a circus. And I don't know if circuses still exist, but basically it's a performance, ma xi tuan, as you say in Chinese. And he joined a circus, and maybe he could entertain people with his fasting abilities that way.
Hardly the main attraction, he was placed in a modest cage near the animals. So when he joined this circus, he was no longer the star of his own show. Because usually when you go to a circus, there's a lot of different acts like lion tamers, fire breathers, and even sword swallowing. So there's a lot of things going on at the circus. That meant that the hunger artist, he was no longer as unique as everybody else.
Right, so they let him work for the circus. They thought, okay, well, people aren't too interested in a starving person, but we'll still give you a job. We're not going to pay you very much. And they gave him a modest cage near the animals. If something's modest, it's just very basic. It's not really special. It's not very attractive. And in this particular case, his cage was near the animals, which was probably not very nice because animals, of course, are very smelly, and he probably had to smell their manure all day long.
And it probably didn't show that the circus had much respect for him as a performer.
Exactly right. So again, he was not the main attraction. He was set in a modest cage near the animals, and occasionally, or sometimes, someone would recognize him or find his self-denial impressive, but far more frequently, people simply walked right by. So occasionally, once in a while, someone would recognize him. Hey, that's that guy who was at that show a couple of years ago who was fasting for 40 days. Pretty cool to see him again. And they may have found his self-denial impressive, but still most people just walked right on by. I want to see something else.
So now that they see that it wasn't that impressive, his performance isn't so impressive, they just moved on and walked right by. Eventually, the hunger artist was forgotten about completely. So because his performance was just not interesting anymore, nobody was interested in seeing a starving, suffering person. That just wasn't as flashy of a performance as the fire breathers or the lion tamers. So eventually, people just forgot about him, especially when he was put in such a modest cage near the animals.
Exactly right. So again, he did not go back to school and learn a new trade. He tried to continue to make money from being a fasting person or a hunger artist, but it wasn't paying off now. And then one day, someone noticed the artist's cage seemingly sitting empty. So yes, indeed, most people were not paying particular attention to him. And then somebody noticed, hey, the cage there seems kind of empty. It's sitting empty. It is there, but it doesn't seem that anybody is inside it.
So it seems like the hunger artist is no longer there. They removed the hay covering the floor to find him there, weak and nearly dead. So they had to remove all the hay from this cage because they couldn't see him. And then they finally found the hunger artist was just very weak and nearly dead. So at this point, he was probably so skinny and so small and weak that all the hay that covered him, he was probably under all this hay. That's why the cage looked very empty. And they had to remove all this hay in order to find him. And at this point, he was not in a good state.
Exactly. So, of course, hay is just dried grass, and it covered the floor, but they moved the hay aside. They saw him there. He was weak and almost dead, and with his last breath, he whispered an apology for wanting so badly to impress everyone. So this was his last breath, and that, of course, means he died after that. So this was his final word, or these were his final words. He whispered an apology for wanting to impress people so much. An apology, of course, is when you say you're sorry for something. The verb is to apologize, and then the actual words themselves are an apology. So whenever something happens in society, somebody calls someone a name or something, then the politician or whatever may demand an apology. You need to apologize to me before we can be friends again.
For example, Josh pushed Katie at the playground, so Katie wanted an apology from Josh.
Right, so he better apologize for pushing her. That is not a nice thing to do. And the truth, he confessed, was that he'd only fasted because he'd never found any food he liked eating. So yes, it was really nothing special here for him to be a hunger artist. It wasn't because he was performing some great feat and he was in self-denial and that he was punishing himself. It wasn't because of that. It was simply because he actually just never really liked to eat food at all. So I wonder how he stayed alive that way. Maybe he could absorb his nutrients directly from the sun.
So just before the hunger artist died, he confessed that he didn't like food, so that's why he fasted. When somebody confesses something, they are trying to tell the truth about something they've been keeping inside for a very long time. For example, Jenny ate all the cookies from the cookie jar, and her mom said, "Who ate the cookies?" She kept it a secret for a really long time until one day she had to confess because she was feeling so bad. She confessed to her mom, "Mommy, I ate all the cookies in the cookie jar."
What a confession. So, of course, to confess means to admit that you did something bad or that you committed a crime or something like that. The criminal confessed to murdering the father of the young girl.
But sometimes you can also confess your love for someone, right?
Right. I've got a confession. I'd like to confess my love for you as well. And yes, indeed, he confessed this truth here. I only fasted because I just couldn't find any food that I liked. And I think we probably know some people like that. Maybe not to such an extreme, but we might know a lot of people who are very picky about the food that they eat. Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Let's listen now to the third and final part.
After his death, he was replaced with a panther. The muscular cat's power and energy drew large crowds. People loved watching it, even though the panther, just like the hunger artist, was only doing what came naturally to it.
最后第三部分我们看到形容词 muscular 指的是肌肉发达的、强壮的或是强大的。举例来说 Joey has muscular legs because he often goes jogging. Joey 的腿部肌肉发达，因为他常去慢跑。最后一个例子 The country has a muscular army with powerful weaponry. 这个国家拥有一支武力强大的军事军队。
Okay, so the hunger artist died, and after his death, he was replaced with a panther. That's a kind of cat. It's a large predatory animal, and they're quite magnificent. The muscular cat's power and energy drew large crowds, as well it should, because back then, of course, this was in the early 1900s, and it wasn't so easy to see panthers in a zoo or something like that. So this is a very muscular cat. It's got lots of muscles. It's very impressive. Of course, we've all heard about the Black Panther. And in this particular case, this was a muscular cat. Its power and energy drew large crowds of people, and people loved watching it, even though the panther, just like the hunger artist, was only doing what came naturally to it. If something's natural to you, or if it comes natural to you, you're just behaving. You're not really doing something special. You haven't really learned any skill. You're just behaving. You're just acting the way you always do.
For example, my father is a TV presenter, so when it comes to performing, it comes very naturally to me.
Okay, you picked it up from your father. Indeed, it comes natural to you. You didn't need to learn any special skills. It's just something you can do by yourself without any help. Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation for today. It's time now to listen to Hanny, our beloved Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第一部分的第二句写道，他的经纪人竭尽所能，带着艺术家走遍半个欧洲，寻找适合的观众，但似乎所有人都达成了秘密协议，不再看他表演了。好，这边有几个重点。首先，文中他是用 his manager tried his best 来表达他的经纪人竭尽所能。那当我们说 try one's best 或者是 do one's best， 就表示全力以赴，竭尽所能。之后常常会接 to 加原形动词来表达说尽全力做某事。补充一下 one's best 可以指说某个人他的最大努力啊，或者是表达最佳状况。那么这边我们就来学几个跟 one's best 有关的用法。第一个是 at one's best， 可以用来描述某人或某事物处于最佳情形，处于全盛状态。像 Richard is an early bird. He's at his best in the morning. Richard 是早起的人，他在早上是处于他的最佳状态。 好，那第二个补充的是 look one's best， 可以用来表达呈现某人最好的一面。举例来说 Diane has a date tonight and wants to look her best. Diane 今晚有约会，她想要打扮得漂漂亮亮的，让自己看起来很棒，呈现出自己最好的一面。那么第三个补充的是 feel one's best， 这是指说觉得身体处于良好状态，很健康。像I'm not feeling my best today， 意思就是我今天觉得不太舒服。好，再来，我们看到课文里面它是用 It was as if everyone had made a secret agreement to stop seeing his shows. 那这边 secret agreement 就表示秘密协议或者是默契。好，那这边要介绍的是连接词 as if 或者是 as though 的用法，用来表达仿佛、似乎或是好像什么什么一样。后面接的子句呢，可以用直说法或者是假设法。首先，我们在描述事实或者是可能发生的情况时，这个子句是要用直说法，也就是说啊，子句里面的时态照正常变化，就依据所描述的时间而定。举例来说 ，The little girl looks as if she's about to cry. 那个小女孩似乎快要哭了。那这有可能是事实，所以我们不用假设语气表达。再来，如果我们是描述跟事实相反的情况，或者是在表达某个假设情况时，子句要用假设法。那么在描述跟现在事实相反的情况时，我们会用 as if 或是 as though 主词加上过去式动词或是 were。如果是在描述与过去事实相反的情况时，我们会用 as if 或是 as though 加上主词加上 had 再加过去分词 pp。像课文就是这个用法，因为应该不太可能全部人都偷偷的达成协议说不要看这个艺术家表演嘛。好，那我们自己来造个例句。Matt speaks as if he were an expert. Matt 说话的样子仿佛他是个专家，那么但事实上他并不是专家，所以我们这边用假设法的子句表达，那么 be 动词是用 were。 好，以上是今天重点整理，我们回顾今天单字吧。
Dedicated.Bonnie is a dedicated doctor who works hard to protect the health of her patients. Modest. My apartment is modest and inexpensive, but it has everything I need. Occasionally. Lamar occasionally likes to treat himself to some ice cream. Self-denial. Practicing self-denial can lead to greater self-discipline and mental strength. Apology. Rachel offered a sincere apology for being late to the meeting.Confess. Henry was eager to confess his true feelings to Cindy. Muscular. The athlete is quite muscular due to his intense workouts.
Discussion Starter starts now!
Okay, everybody, it's time for our discussion starter for today. The question is, do you think the hunger artist's commitment to his art was admirable? Why or why not?
I do admire the artist for his commitment to his art, but I wished he was more committed to something else less harmful to himself, especially at the end when we find out that his reasoning for fasting or for starving himself wasn't even because of the performance. It was because he just didn't like food.
Yeah, so I don't admire the artist's commitment to starving himself, considering that he never really learned any special skills. He was probably a lazy student, and he rested on his laurels, thinking that he could just rely on this special skill that came natural to him to make a living, when, like the rest of us, he should have been studying hard in school. Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Roger.
I am Kiki.
See you next time.